believe that this will not continue. I love Hello and welcome to Crosstalk, where all things are considered. I'm Peter Lavelle. Who would have thought Russia and Vladimir Putin would play such an important role in the American presidential election? The media treadmill claims Trump is under Putin's spell, and Hillary Clinton blames the Russian president for still another scandal. Russia is a one-size-fits-all political tool. To Crosstalk Trump and Putin, I'm joined by my guest, Daniel McAdams and Lake Jackson. He is the executive director of the Ron Paul Institute for Peace and Prosperity. And in Washington, we cross to Ray McGovern. He's a former CIA analyst and co-founder of Veteran Intelligence Professionals for Sanity. All right, gentlemen, Crosstalk rules in effect. That means you can jump in anytime you want, and I very much encourage it. Ray, if I can go to you first, we're calling this program the Siberian Candidate. I know I'm not the first one to say that, but now that that whole idea is beginning to take on currency in the American media. Hillary Clinton gets caught and her political party get caught cheating, treating their fellow candidate Bernie Sanders with quite disdain, which we all thought was the case in the beginning, and now it's been proven. And within the same news cycle, no, Vladimir Putin is to blame. Go ahead.
What a convenient bête noire is Vladimir Putin. Yeah, Hillary was caught red-handed. That woman that runs the Democratic National Committee, those emails show that, just as everyone has said, including Trump, by the way, it was rigged. Bernie Sanders never had a chance. Now, whose fault is all this? Well, somehow or other, it turns out to be Vladimir Putin's fault. You see, if you vote for Trump, you're going to get Putin in the White House, just as if you vote for Hillary, you'll have Netanyahu. Wow, what a choice. So what we have here is a deliberate campaign. I always turn to some of the more egregious people. Here's Bill Kristol.
Yeah.
Here's Bill Kristol talking about, wow, Trump and his top campaign aide have very troubling contacts with Vladimir Putin's regime. Here's one. And you'll relate to this, Peter. General Michael Flynn, one of Trump's political national security advisors, was seated next to Vladimir Putin at a Russian propaganda celebration.
Now, I was there.
I was there, too.
I was there, too.
Yeah. I spoke there just as Lieutenant General Flynn spoke. I didn't see Vladimir Putin. You know, he must have been hiding under a chair. Well, that evening we did have a little celebration. That is, we who are celebrating 10 years of RT, we get some real information. And unbeknownst, in comes Vladimir Putin to say a few words, and then he hung around for some of the entertainment. Now, I was pretty close to him. He didn't sit next to me. But I didn't see him sit next to General Flynn, even if he sat next to General Flynn. I mean, talk about guilt by association, guilt by sitting next to one.
Okay.
I mean, it's really get a bed.
Okay, we're going to continue with that. I'd like to also bring into the program here, we have George Samueli. He is a fellow at the Global Policy Institute of London Metropolitan University and author of the book Bombs for Peace. George, thank you for joining us here. Who would have thought? You know, what the media is saying is that Trump is a patsy of Vladimir Putin with no paper trail that I can discern here. A lot of innuendos here. But we do know that Bill Clinton came to Moscow and spoke to Renaissance Capital, and he walked away with a very, very fat check here. But no one is saying that Hillary Clinton is in bed with the Kremlin, are they? Go ahead, George.
No, that's absolutely right. It's an interesting issue that at the start of this election campaign, the theme on Trump was that this is a dangerous, reckless person. As soon as he's in the White House, he's going to have an itchy finger and he's going to launch nuclear war. The story has now changed. My God, as soon as he's in the White House, he's going to pick up a phone, call up Putin and say, what can I do for you, Vladimir? So if that's the case, then why do we need to worry about war? They're great. I mean, quick summit between Trump and Putin, and a lot of the problems are going to be solved. No, I mean, it's an amazing thing is that how the media have been endlessly going on this. They're reading from the same script. I mean, it's like somebody wrote the same article and they've been issued to, well, here's your copy, Julia Ioffe, here's your copy, Timothy Snyder, Paul Krugman, you ought to read from this. They're all saying the same thing. They're all citing the same few little bits of evidence, a few ambiguous compliments that Trump and Putin extended to one another. There is no evidence whether there's any sort of serious relationship between the two. I mean, Trump has some business interests, but is it as serious to argue that his business interests with some Russian investors is the most important part of his business empire? It's absurd. And again, as far as the Russians goes, are their dealings with Trump the most important part of the Russian economy? I mean, it's ludicrous.
Daniel, it's very interesting because the record does show is that Donald Trump did make a number of attempts to enter the Russian market, primarily in real estate and hotels, and he had zero success. I mean, if he had such strong connections with the Kremlin and the people around Putin, you would think that he would own, the main streets of Moscow, but he doesn't. His competition's there, but he's not there. He hasn't done any serious business whatsoever in Russia. Go ahead.
Yeah, how dare he try to do business with private business people and build a business empire? What is he supposed to be doing? The funniest comment I got on this whole thing was an article on Defense One, one of the most absurd things ever. Putin weaponized WikiLeaks. And the whole article was just hysterical nonsense. But at the end, someone had a great comment. It said, okay, so let me get this. The Democrats are mad that the Russians fixed the elections by publishing documents showing how the Democrats fixed the elections. And I just thought that captured it perfectly. And now nobody's talking about the elections being fixed, they're talking about Putin. And let's not forget the DNC hired this expert.
No, Daniel, say a little bit more about that. Go ahead. Go ahead.
Okay. I was just going to say that the DNC hired this expert to prove that it was the Russians. The company is called CrowdStrike, and everyone's citing them as the expert that proves it. But if you look at the founder of CrowdStrike, Dmitry Alperovitch, he turns out to be a fellow at the Atlantic Council, which is funded by NATO and is one of the most anti-Russia, pro-war outfits out there. So this is not someone that's an objective view of this whole thing.
Ray, it really gets down to, because what they're trying to do is to tie Trump and Putin together. So essentially you have a choice between Hillary Clinton and Vladimir Putin, which is nonsense. But that's how politics works, okay? These spin masters, they can come up with the most interesting things here. But the fact of the matter is that Donald Trump questions the security status quo around the world, and he's picked up on NATO here. Having member countries pay for their own defense is not an unreasonable thing to ask. And when that terrible interview, so-called interview with the New York Times, that he was pressed about the Baltic countries, he never said that NATO shouldn't invoke collective security. He never said that. But at the same time, he said, why don't we reform it? I mean, that's such a taboo right now, and that's how they're going to go after him. Go ahead.
Well, that's right. He has touched a raw nerve here. If you look beyond 1 year, NATO is falling apart.
Yep.
Its raison d'etre has long since vanished. Turkey is sort of easing away. The German foreign minister has criticized those exercises, the biggest ones on the Russian-Polish border in 75 years, and that's when the Nazis invaded Poland and Russia. And so the place is, kind of very hanging by a thread. Now, the Baltic states, well, that's something else. But what we have here is a situation where if someone asks sensible questions, like, are we really willing to sacrifice New York for Tallinn in Estonia? Are we really willing to start a fracas on the border with Russia with the consequences that would obtain from that? And those questions are ones that come inevitably from what Trump is raising here. They're disguised as Europeans should pay more for their own defense. Well, that's of course a known, and that plays well in the U.S. media. But the whole business of the post-World War II structure, which has been a boon to what Pope Francis called the blood-soaked arms manufacturers and arms traders, that's very much at risk. And that's what Hillary is wedded to.
You know, George, and I was watching the Young Turks a few hours ago, and they were discussing this issue here. I have to say, for sometimes smart people, they made complete fools out of themselves here. They actually believe that Donald Trump is going to hand over Estonia. Now, I've been to Estonia, and it's a nice little country, a lot of forests, okay? Nice, okay? But I didn't know that it's the most important geopolitical point on the planet, and it will decide the fate of the world. They seem to think so. Go ahead.
Yes. No, that's absolutely right. And so all of these speculations, United States won't fulfill its obligations if the Russians march on Estonia, or if the Russians invade Poland, Trump might think twice about it. Well, first of all, why on earth would Russia do any of these things? I mean, what on earth, why should they do anything so ridiculous? I mean, Russia could have, but didn't take eastern Ukraine. I mean, it was there. The eastern Ukrainians were asking to be reincorporated to Russia. Putin said no. So why on earth would he want to take over Estonia? And of course, all of these stories ignore the most real dangers of a conflict with Russia and the invocation of Article 5. And that's when the United States and its NATO allies start messing around in Ukraine and start getting more and more involved in that war in Ukraine. Or if the United States and its NATO allies do something stupid like start shooting down Russian aircraft in Syria. So these are much more realistic scenarios than the totally ludicrous notion that the Russians are suddenly going to march on Estonia.
I'm going to jump in here, gentlemen. We have to go to a very short break, and after that short break, we'll continue our discussion on Donald Trump. Stay with RT.
When lawmakers manufacture consent instead of public wealth. When the ruling classes protect only themselves. When the financial merry-go-round lifts only the 1% up. It's time to ignore middle-of-the-road signals. Going underground, bringing real news to Britain and the world.
To make up their own minds. Pluralism, not bigotry. Better informed. All indisputable principles, right? The traditional press are always accusing us of propaganda and lies, of political bias. They try to teach us how to be journalists and not take sides. But you know what? Turns out our teachers are the cheaters. Journalism, really.
Welcome back to Crosstalk, where all things are considered. I'm Peter Lavelle. To remind you, we're discussing the latest events in the U.S. presidential election. Okay, Daniel, I'd like to go back to you. In looking at this campaign here, Trump's opponents, they've tried to stick a number of labels on him. He's a racist, he's a bigot, he's ignorant, he's backward, he's not even a Republican, he's not conservative. And now looks like, at least at this point in time, they've found their label for him. And basically, it's red baiting. We're going back to the Cold War. This is how the Democrats are going to fight this campaign here. And yeah, I mean, and you know what? And you know, as an American, that really is a raw nerve for a lot of Americans still, because of, you know, the way it's played out in Hollywood and popular culture and all that. And this is what they're trying to do here. What really worries me is that what if Clinton gets into power? What is she going to do the first day? Push the button? Because that's what she's saying, that Russia is a terrible security threat to the United States. I mean, it doesn't work out no matter what angle you take. This is a bad road to go down. Go ahead, Daniel.
Yeah, as a matter of fact, when I started thinking about the show, my first thing I wrote down was the Democrats have gone full McCarthyite.
Yeah, yeah.
And it's very ironic to see, or the left has gone full McCarthyite, you know, which is hilarious. But I think a lot of this is actually driven by the neocons, and most of them have gone against Trump. By the way, I'm no Trump supporter by any stretch of the imagination, just an observer of the scene. But the neocons have lined up very solidly for Hillary and very much against Trump. Robert Kagan said, these past 25 years of foreign policy have been exceptional for the U.S. But, you know, think about the neocons and the philosophy. Yeah.
Whoa, whoa.
For his bank account, they've been great.
Sure.
But the neocons follow the philosophy of Leo Strauss. And Leo Strauss believes that the governing class must be deceptive. They must deceive the people, and they must create national myths. Those national myths keep them in power. And they always rely on having an enemy figure, a hated figure, and an enemy nation. And this is exactly what the neocons have done all along, whether it was Saddam Hussein or Gaddafi or Putin. This is how they operate. They know how to mobilize people's fear in order to take power, and this is exactly what we're seeing here.
You know, Ray, you have a lot of experience here. I mean, one of the things that really worries me is that, you know, these artificial tensions are being increased by the day, and this is a campaign. I mean, and to tell our foreign viewers, you know, campaigning in the United States is a lot about hyperbole. We have to keep that in mind. But not everyone in the world understands that hyperbole here, and it very much looks like is that we're going to see a candidate that's going to be empowered for even more interventionism, because that's exactly what it's coming out of the Hillary campaign. Trump, on the other hand, in an article that was in the National Interest, wants to move away from that. So kind of echoing what Daniel had to say here, I mean, it's not just Trump. It's any position that threatens the status quo of the elites of American foreign policy since the Second World War, particularly since the end of the Cold War.
Well, that's right, Peter. But I'd like to go back to something that George said, which makes me think that George might be a Putin-Versteher. Now, that is a very pejorative word in German, which means someone who understands Putin. Now, understand has this pejorative connotation, the way it's being used, that if you understand Putin, then you're an apologist for him.
Ah.
Now, I kid, of course.
Of course.
George is exactly right. Why would Putin want Tallinn, or want Estonia, or Latvia, or Lithuania? I've been there too. Why did Putin invade Ukraine? Well, actually,
he didn't.
Most Americans don't realize that he didn't. Okay? And so what they read is something like this. This is my favorite example. March 10th last year, headline in the Washington Post: Putin had early plan to annex Crimea.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
They referred to a secret meeting on the 23rd of February, where he got his national security advisors around. They said, what are we going to do? How are we going to seize Crimea, right? Now, the whole thing goes down. See, now, it was just a few weeks later, then they seized it, they annexed it, they invaded. Now, no mention is made of what happened on the 22nd of February, my math is right. That's the day before.
Yeah, and that's
no mention.
And that was in Kiev. And that was in Kiev.
Biggest
Go ahead.
coup in history.
Yes, of course, of course.
Yeah, well, George Friedman, you know, no novice to this, that was the most flagrant, the most blatant coup in human history. And of course it was. It was advertised ahead of time on YouTube 2.5 weeks before, when our Assistant Secretary for European Affairs, Secretary of State, talked with our ambassador in Kiev and said, okay, Yats is the guy. We're going to do this. It's all glued, ready. Yats knows what he needs to do. And then, you know, I thought he'd be disqualified once his name was, was here. But no. 2.5 weeks later, on the 22nd of February 2014, Yats becomes the prime minister, immediately recognized by the United States. So that's where it starts, on the 22nd of February, not on the 23rd. Yeah. And the most recent example of this is our ambassador to NATO said, the current phase of NATO history begins on February 23rd, okay? That's when it starts. So Putin's being blamed by for all this, and most Americans don't know how to read this because they think they get news from the New York Times and the Washington Post. They don't. That's the dangerous thing, because they could easily be rallied behind a demagogue like Trump or like Hillary Clinton.
You know, George, you said something earlier in our program that I think is really important for our viewers to understand, is because what opposed to what happened during the Cold War, where there was a debate, at least, a debate about what American foreign policy, Western foreign policy should be about vis-a-vis the Soviet Union. There was a real honest debate, and it was an honorable debate. Now we have the left progressives that have just completely dropped off the map. I mean, they've completely absorbed the neocon agenda, and I don't even know how aware they are. But what has happened here is that because the left progressives have behaved so abysmally and stupidly, I would say, is that we don't have the debate. I expect the neocons to be neocons, okay? They've never saw a war they didn't love, and they keep looking for more interventions. There's no end to that among them. But the left progressives, they had a choice, and they have abrogated their responsibility, and that's one of the reasons why we don't have a debate today. Go ahead, except for here on Crosstalk. Go ahead, George.
No, that's absolutely right. It is remarkable, just the sheer uniformity. I mean, you go through these publications, Huffington Post, the Daily Beast, Slate, Salon, The Guardian, New York Times, Washington Post, The Atlantic. They're all reading from the same script. And that's leaving aside television. And they're all saying the same thing. Putin is this terrible person. They just all describe Putin as a dictator. The enormous threat that he poses to the West. Trump is his hand puppet. They're all reading from the same script. And anybody at all who tries to question that is immediately slandered by being, oh, he's Putin's agent. This is Putin's parrot. I mean, and this is being used against somebody as a distinguished professor like Stephen Cohen, who's written an enormous number of books and a world-renowned expert on the subject. He gets regularly slimed by many of these kind of so-called journalists as a Putin apologist. Somebody who's working for the Kremlin. I mean, it is an extraordinary the uniformity of this opinion. And I think it's really quite frightening, because should there be any kind of a conflict in the future, public opinion will be mobilized remarkably quickly.
Daniel, where do we go from here? Because Camp Trump, they can say in the next news cycle, in the next couple of days, come out with some fiery words against Russia. I mean, this gambit that the Clinton people are playing with her neocon friends here, it can take on another spin as well here. But I think what's really tragic here is using Russia as a straw man in this election, because it tells me the Democrats don't want to talk about real important issues here. And if the only way they can get elected is this neo-red baiting, then I think it's a tragedy for the United States, because there is no real conversation about what ails the country, and much does. Go ahead, Daniel.
Well, I think the Democrats made a deal with the devil. They made a deal to bring the neocons into their party in the hopes that this brain power they have, which has failed everywhere, will get them in power. But the other thing that this whole episode does is undermines the core of U.S. foreign policy, which is lecturing the rest of the world how they should behave, how they should hold elections. It's clear that this process was rigged. It was rigged against Bernie Sanders, like it was rigged against Ron Paul in 2012. Yet the U.S. will go to the Crimeans and say, oh, no, you held a referendum. That doesn't count. That doesn't meet our standards. Oh, East Ukraine, you held a vote. That doesn't count. That doesn't meet our standards. When all of our elections are rigged.
Yeah.
So let's hope that people start to stop believing in this U.S. foreign policy.
You know, Ray, that's such a good point here, because the whole origins of the recent scandal is the very undemocratic nature of the Democratic Party. I mean, just reading some of those emails, it is extraordinary that these people would be sending these things back and forth by email, okay? And again, Hillary Clinton doesn't have any handle on her security whatsoever. I mean, that has to send a signal to a normal, rational person, but it doesn't look like it has much traction. Go ahead, Ray.
Well, that's because of the media, Peter. We all know that. Now, what's interesting here is that Trump or even Hillary have an opening. And Vladimir Putin gave them that after he prevented a war against Syria. He bailed Obama out in early September 2013, and then he wrote an op-ed for the New York Times. I'm reliably told that he wrote the last paragraph of this op-ed. It's not very long, a few sentences. I'd like to read it to you. My working relationship with President Obama has growing trust, but I would disagree with a case he made on American exceptionalism, okay? It's very dangerous, extremely dangerous, to encourage people to see themselves as exceptional. There are big countries, small countries, rich and poor, those with democratic traditions, and those still finding their way to democracy. We are all different, but when we ask for the Lord's blessings, we must not forget that God created us all equal.
Yes, and as George Samueli, we've run out of time, gentlemen, but as George Samueli said, look at the Western media. It's all very uniform, exceptionally uniform. Many thanks to my guests in Lake Jackson, Washington, and in New York. And thanks to our viewers for watching us here at RT. See you next time, and remember, Crosstalk rules.
I love you.